All right, folks, we're going to get started here with the program. So again, just continue to eat. Folks that are coming in will be grabbing their lunches and finding a spot to sit down, so we welcome everybody for sure. Thank you all for being here, though. We appreciate you very much. My name is Scott Hennon, spokesperson for a group called Friends of Ag and Energy that Kathy Nessett chairs. Kathy, for those of you who are not familiar, is a geologist and also a farmer. So she's a great combination. She couldn't be with us today, but she sends her well wishes for sure. And if you go to our website, agenergyfriends.com, all of the events that we've done are chronicled there. This one too will be up as well. So if you are taking notes feverishly and not getting everything, you can go back and watch it online at the website, agenergyfriends.com. We are going to take questions from the audience at the end of each of the panels. So you'll see 3x5 cards on your table. Go ahead and write those down, and we'll be collecting those before the end of each panel and taking your questions, and I'll come out in the audience for a couple of questions as well. But what we promise to do is that every question that is asked on those 3x5 cards will be answered on our website, agenergyfriends.com. So be bold and ask any question you might have and you want an answer to. And we track down the answers. We've done that with all of our events, and it works pretty well. So I'd like you to help me welcome two very influential people in the world of agriculture, not only here in Minnesota and North Dakota, but nationally as well. The chairman of the House Ag Committee for a long, long time, and also ranking member, represented Minnesota's Congressional District number 7 for, I lost track how many decades, 30 years. Unbelievable. Collin Peterson, give him a hand, former House Ag Chair. And North Dakota's Ag Commissioner, a real champion of both ag and energy, Doug Goring with us today as well, part of the Industrial Commission. I call it North Dakota's Politburo. Pretty darn important, that 3-member Industrial Commission that is our board of directors basically for the state of North Dakota, Doug Goring. Give Doug a hand as well.
Thank you.
So let's start big picture if we could here, gentlemen. Collin, I'll start with you. The topic of today is how do we leverage CO2 technologies that are available to us to grow markets? What do you want these folks to know?
What I know?
What do you want them to know?
Oh, I was going to. What I know, I'm not going to talk about.
Yeah, well, you're going to tell us what you know.
I've never been a big fan of this whole carbon thing. I think it's kind of overdone, and there's a lot of ideology behind some of this and so forth. And also, we haven't really figured out a way to measure this, and we really don't know what the heck we're doing. But this has moved beyond us. In California, Washington State, Oregon, they have gone to this low carbon fuel standard. Europe has done that. The rest of the world has moved to this low carbon fuel. So whether you like it or not, that's where we're heading. And that's frankly where we are. So then we come along with the sustainable aviation fuel, which has the potential of being, a big new market for us, and especially in ethanol. And but it requires, under the law, you have to have a carbon score of less than 50. The ethanol generally has a carbon score of around 60. Now, there's a few plants that are below 50 and are actually selling into California and so forth now. But the majority of the plants do not have that capability. So what the idea is to try to get the carbon score of these ethanol plants below 50. So one of the ways that people have talked about is this GREET model, as opposed to whatever that other one is called. So the GREET model was developed by the Argonne Laboratories, which is going to change the way they do land use, measurement, and so forth and so on. And some people thought the GREET model would get us below 50. Well, first of all, they've delayed putting it out, and number one. Number two, we're not sure, given what they're talking about, it's actually going to get us where we need to be. So I think the bottom line is that if we don't figure out some way to sequester this carbon off of these ethanol plants, we're not going to be able to fit this market. And, there's two things that come out in an ethanol plant. One is steam, water, and the other is CO2. So it's very hard, very easy to separate It's easy to, you have to put some equipment in, but it's easier to separate it and turn it into liquid so you can move it. Now, it can be moved by truck. It can be moved by rail. But the most efficient way to move it is pipelines. And that's caused, as you know, some controversy, different places. So if we can get the carbon off of the plants and get it out to western North Dakota, which is the closest place that you can sequester it, we can lower the carbon score for these plants to about 30, which means that we are going to be the supplier of the feedstock for sustainable aviation fuel. Now, we're the only, in my opinion, the only feedstock of sufficient scale to be able to actually supply the sustainable aviation fuel market. People are talking about kitchen grease and all this other stuff. There's not enough of that to make it work. So in my opinion, if you don't get sustainable aviation ethanol qualified, you're not going to be able to do this. So why is this important? Well, because 40% of the corn in the United States goes into ethanol.
I think it's actually higher in North Dakota even than
Yeah, probably higher in North Dakota. Yeah. So if you lose, so ethanol, the market has been flat in ethanol. We've built all these plants and we've been flat and we're making money, but there's no growth going on. And the only way that we can see that there's growth is in sustainable aviation fuel, which has potential of doubling the amount of ethanol that we produce in this country, maybe more. But if we don't qualify, it's not going to happen. So that's why I got involved in this, because it's not understood by people. And if you want to talk about a disaster, these crop prices are coming down anyway. And next year I'm not sure where this is going to end up, but it doesn't look good. If you lose ethanol out of the corn market, you're going to be looking at $3 corn, maybe less. Now, how is that going to work with these land prices that we've been paying, or rent prices we've been paying? So it's very important for the future of our ag industry in this part of the world that we get this fixed. And I'm part of the American Carbon Alliance, and our job is not to promote any pipelines or any other thing like that. It's to educate the public about carbon and what these rules are and so forth. And that's what we're trying to do. These 45Z and 45Q credits that were done by
Trump administration, right?
Yeah.
Goes back to Trump.
Yeah. And Biden supports it.
Yep.
So he supports sequestration. So for you got now a bipartisan support of this industry, but a lot of people don't understand it. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to educate them why this is important. People say to me, "Why are you buying into all this nonsense?" I said, "Well, I can maybe agree with you a little bit, but the truth is the thing has moved beyond that, and we're now in this new era, and I don't think it's going to change."
Doug, I want to ask you a little bit, same thing, just kind of big picture, what this means for markets, but also bring us back a little history, because you've been battling this space way back
Long
to the
time.
Schaefer administration, Hogan administration. Talk about where this all started.
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me here, having both of us here. I want to say right off the bat, I concur 100% with Colin. Not a fan of carbon or CO2 and this whole sequestration thing. But that being said, 15 years ago, we on the Industrial Commission saw the attack. And actually, if you go back into the 2000s, we were already hearing about our carbon footprint, and we could see the attacks on our power plants. During that period of time, with the studies that had been done, some of the information that was being collected, we also saw a value and a use, because we saw CO2 as an opportunity to do tertiary oil recovery or enhanced oil recovery. In fact, North Dakota, out of one of our power plants, or out of the Dakota gasification facility, we're sending CO2 to the Weyburn fields in Canada, and I've been there, visited it. They've added about 50 years, they claim, to the life of that oil field by having access to CO2. Plus, they've enhanced a lot of their oil production up there. Looking at all these things, we chose on the Industrial Commission to seek the authority or primacy to do Class 6 injection, which would mean we could collect and we could actually sequester CO2 in our formation. And there's 2 prime locations in the United States that have the geology that would support this: Wyoming and North Dakota. I believe I heard here recently Louisiana probably is doing or has gotten permission and primacy to do that also. But that's where we started in 2009. We did it to save our coal-fired electric generation facilities because we could see the attack on them over this carbon footprint. And we also did it because we could enhance oil production, oil and gas production here in North Dakota. Fast forward, I believe 2016, right in that timeline there, we were granted primacy and the ability to regulate that industry. Hence, you could see the power plants were starting to work on this. We called it Project Tundra. That was one of them. We also...
Which we're going to talk about today on one of the panels coming up. Yep.
That'll be a good opportunity to talk about what they're doing. And we also talked about what we could do, how could we create the infrastructure for the oil and gas industry, because there's so much value that comes out of that, not only with respect to energy independence for this nation, but with respect for all of the funding that comes out of there that we have in extraction tax and royalties that we now use for research. We use it for enhancing research in agriculture and biofuels. We also look at rural water, which is a huge benefit, and water supply and flood control for North Dakota. There's a lot of work that gets funded through oil and gas, and even those people that aren't necessarily fans of oil and gas do recognize the great deal of value that comes out of that.
Every school,
Every school, they
water
get,
project,
yeah,
roads, bridges, yeah.
it's a lot of infrastructure and a lot of other wonderful things that have been funded, and we'll continue to do that going forward. I guess with all that being said, though, I recognize that there is a program in place, and it is incentivizing industry to go out there and invest in capture sequestration. So why don't we use it to our benefit? I may not like how the whole pipeline issue has transpired, but I do see value in it on the back end, which is after 12 years of them meeting their obligation, then that's available for us to use in different ways. And that's probably where I see the biggest benefit. And Colin's right. The ethanol industry benefits on the back side of this or the front side of this and gives us the ability to create a better market for ethanol and actually look at more sustainable aviation fuel and create more desire, more incentive to continue to look at ethanol as that feedstock.
Let's talk a little bit about sustainable aviation fuel and the possibility there. You told me something last week when we were chatting, Colin, that ethanol is the only feedstock that could provide the volume necessary.
It's not the only feedstock. It's the only one of any scalable size that's available right now, if it qualifies for the CI score. Because, there's not enough cooking grease. And they're already putting it into biodiesel and these other things. It's just not available. And, the other problem with the oils, and this has been a continuing problem with biodiesel and everything, it's so expensive that you got to have a subsidy to make it work. So we're paying $1 a gallon. They talk about $1.75 a gallon for sustainable aviation fuel. Well, I don't think it makes sense for us to set up some kind of a system where we're going to have to subsidize it forever. We got ethanol off of the subsidies. They had a credit. We got rid of it. So we don't want to go down a path where you're going to have a permanent $1 a gallon, $1.50 a gallon subsidy in order to make it work. So the thing that's available, we know how to make ethanol. We know how to ship it. We know how to store it. We know how to deal with it, and it's there. We just have to make it available.
Talk about the opportunity for ag markets, folks in this room, if we are able to get into the sustainable aviation fuel space.
Well, they're talking about doubling the size of the ethanol industry, minimum, maybe tripling it. So that means either adding on to the plants, building more plants, more corn going into the system. It's just, you can't do anything but improve the value of the farmer's product because it's more demand. So we got a big demand in livestock, we got a big demand in ethanol, and we could have a big demand in the sustainable aviation fuel going forward.
We're going to talk a little bit about that a little later on, and one of our panelists is going to bring us up to speed on this opportunity. But we have competitors in this space, meaning the folks in this room that would have the opportunity through ethanol to get into the sustainable aviation fuel. We're not the only game in town. We're fighting Brazil, as one example, with dirtier ethanol, right?
Yeah, they're sending ethanol into the United States now that we can't get into California. They're taking in from Brazil. Yep. And this is the craziest damn thing that I've been to Brazil a lot. And the last time I was down there, they were making, it's a sugar mill. It's a brand new sugar mill. They were burning bagasse, which is the leaves of the plant, out in the open to create heat. And they were running this vinasse, which is this nasty black liquid, right into the river. And yet they got qualified as, a
green,
carbon-friendly.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. And it's partly because they're a so-called developing nation. Well, let me tell you something. In agriculture, they are way overdeveloped. They're going to give us a run for our money because I was down there the last time. They were getting 70 bushel soybeans, first crop. Second crop, they have shifted to cotton, and they're getting 5 bale cotton. Now, people don't know a lot about cotton up here, but a normal crop in the United States is 2 bale. So they're getting 70 bushel soybeans, 5 bale cotton, and how the heck are we going to compete on that? We're trying to force people to do cover crops, that they can't grow because they don't have enough time. I'm very worried about where this whole thing is heading. So we got to become competitive with those guys.
By the way, I meant to mention, in addition to writing down your questions on the cards there, and we'll pick a few at the end of each panel from anyone in the audience that wants to ask. You can also text in questions as well. So jot this number down or dial it into your phone. And if you got a question, you can send it to me. The number is 701-367-2054. Happens to be my cell phone number, so text anytime. 701-367-2054, but I'll get them right here if you do that. I want to talk a little bit about, Colin mentioned the pipeline part of this. And, some people have asked the question, we're talking about Summit Carbon Solutions Pipeline Project, which, just for a brief refresher, Friends of Ag and Energy is advocating for this technology. And right now, the only way this technology works is through pipelines. So we're pro-pipeline. But we don't get into the weeds on any specific pipeline. Obviously, the one that is being currently considered for a permit before the Public Service Commission is the Summit Carbon Solutions Pipeline. And some landowners have been reluctant to sign up. Other folks think, again, kind of coming back to why would we get into this, play the game of carbon and everything else? What do you want folks to know about the pipeline? Why do you think it has struggled early on?
Well, I think it struggled because primarily they didn't understand the culture of North Dakota. They brought in the wrong landmen. I believe there's another aspect to this too. People have perceived that Summit is supportive of climate policy, and probably when you look across North Dakota, 80% of the people are not big fans of the climate change policy. But if they would have come out and said, we're doing this because a program exists, much like farmers participate in a program, whether they believe in the farm program or not, they probably would have gotten some credibility. I think the other thing, if they would have said it up front, is, hey, yes, we're taking advantage of this program, but after 12 years, it's available for other uses. That probably would have brought them a lot more credibility. But when you go silent and all you do is come in and try to put a pipeline down, and people feel bullied and they feel threatened, that spreads like wildfire. And by that time, it's hard to undo that, and people take positions, draw lines in the sand. That's not to say that there aren't a lot of people that have signed up, but I said from the very beginning, it's a private property issue, and they need to sort this out with landowners. Now, they've changed their ways, and they're moving forward, and they're doing some things.
By the way, from one of these programs we did out west, we learned that the company actually fired 55 people that were part of that initial group and
I understand.
apologized for those conversations going sideways. Doesn't change the fact that it happened. And as you say, it spreads like wildfire, but they have done that. They've also now said that right now they anticipate the sequestration is going to be the use for that carbon, but in the future, absolutely enhanced oil recovery will as well. So these things have come around, but when you start...
Once you go down that road and you open that can of worms, some people are they've taken a position and they're not changing for a while. So let it calm down and they'll work through some of this.
If I could just say, the reason there is an organized effort against this, because the environmental community and others do not want oil and gas to survive.
That's
Period.
true also.
They want to get rid of your internal combustion engine, period. There is a huge amount of money behind this. This is not some kind of thing that just came out of the public. This is an orchestrated deal, and it's being done the same way in Illinois, in Indiana, and other places in the country. This is not just generic. It's orchestrated, and there's a lot of money behind it. And they want to get rid of your internal combustion engine and force you to drive an EV, which good luck in North Dakota. You're going to do that, so.
And Colin's right. When you look at the efforts behind this, the last thing they want is to have North Dakota or anybody in this situation to produce a carbon neutral or carbon negative barrel of oil. Because, oh my God, you just taken the argument away from them. And that's very true. So I think once we move beyond this, we'll be able to see it. But there's some people whose feelings are hurt, and quite frankly, there's some older farmers and landowners that when you threaten them, they're not responding well. They'll be like, over my dead body before you get to come across my land now, and you can offer them a lot of money. It's in principle for them. So I get that. I understand it. The PSC will have to address issues with siting and safety, which falls under their purview. Oh, there we go. But it'll be FERC, because it's a FERC regulated line, that ultimately will have the final say. So chances are they're going to be granted the ability to have a pipeline, but they first have to address the issues that have been identified by the PSC and concerns by the public, safety and siting.
Let's go back to, and I understand there's been 5,000 reroutes, I learned from the Public Service Commission.
Yeah.
5,000 reroutes of the pipeline, largely to either move around people that are not interested in participating or accommodating actual landowners. Latest number I heard now is 90% of the right-of-way has been secured. So, obviously concerns among the 10%, and it isn't across the finish line yet, but the vast majority of landowners have been satisfied with that. Would you agree with that?
I would say that's probably true.
And that's the way it works in any pipeline.
Yep.
You got that last 10% that are going to hold out thinking they can get more money out of the system or whatever. And it's not just with carbon pipelines, but it's natural gas, oil,
Absolutely.
all these other pipelines. We got pipelines running all over this country that are a hell of a lot more dangerous than any carbon pipeline. And nobody's talking about those.
Somebody said, remind the chairman that cover crops, he's correct, short growing season is a factor. However, farmers don't plant cover crops because they don't have tile.
They don't have tile?
Yeah.
That could be.
In North Dakota, that's an issue.
Gee, I wonder who that came
So
from.
you've got an issue though, because we don't have the thanks, Levi. So we don't have the growing season to be able to do what they can do in the middle of the country.
Yeah.
And cover crops work good in Arkansas. You can work that system and you can add to your profits and so forth. Up here, it's a challenge. How are you going to get this in the ground when you got a corn crop, soybean crop? You got to fly it in. That's expensive, and then it may or may not grow depending on if you got rain or not. I'm a believer in cover crops. I use it up in my farm. It works, but it's a challenge. And it's not, so the government is forcing us to do things that are actually lowering our net profit because of what they're forcing us to do. where other parts of the country, they're actually adding to their net profit by what they're doing. And people just need to recognize this. It's just not something you can wave your wand and say you're going to have cover crops and everything's going to be fine. That's just not true.
Yeah, great point. And, I always, the way I analyze this whole situation is, if there's a football field and the referees decide that the field goes from 100 yards to 50 yards, you don't have much choice. You're playing on that field, and the game changed on you. But if you don't want to play, then goodbye, right? So it seems to me that the solutions we're talking about here, for the benefit of new markets for these folks in this room, is we've devised a way to beat them at their own game with unique geology in North Dakota and the partnership ultimately with oil and gas that will change things. I mean, is that a fair analogy?
And they don't like it,
Yeah.
the fact that you figured this out. So I've been to your plant north of Bismarck. They've built a pipeline over there a couple miles, putting it in the ground. It's working. The plant at west of Bismarck is also sequestering. So you're already doing it here, and it works. And that's the Biden administration is behind it. The environmentalists don't like that. But, this is a way to get carbon out of the atmosphere, if that's your goal.
And we're talking about man-made carbon, so it's coming off of plants. This is another thing, Doug, that a lot of people talk about, well, carbon's good.
It is.
Carbon makes plants grow. We need carbon.
It's essential
we need to breathe.
for life.
Yeah. But the amount of carbon we're talking about here is a sliver of what is man-made carbon, in this case coming off an ethanol stack, right? So we're not talking about sucking up all the carbon and somehow, causing plants to die.
No, actually this is being produced, and that would be another reason why I'd be supportive of it. When you have these plants that are producing CO2, if you can take it and use it for some value, some benefit for society, like food grade CO2, that's great. But the reality is that's a very finite market. So if we have the ability to do something else with it that will benefit some of our value-added processing, let's take advantage of it. If we're going to do it to save a power plant, I'm all for it, because that's the reason we started all this to begin with. So we just happen to be blessed with the right geology. We happen to be blessed with oil and gas production, and we have coal. Let's take advantage of it. And we're producing more and more corn, and we got a couple ethanol plants in the state, so we'll take advantage of that.
We could have 3 or 4 more.
We could have 3 or 4 more, exactly.
Yeah, what other markets do you see here, Colin? Obviously, we're talking a lot about corn and ethanol, but what other commodities are going to win in this space?
Well, you've got these other things going on with renewable diesel. You can use oil, but I think soybean oil is frankly too expensive, which is a problem they've had with the biodiesel. So they're working on other crops that they're trying. The University of Minnesota is spending all their time working on these new crops that they think will get us what we need, more oil out of the crops and so forth. It might happen. It's not there yet. And I'm not one of those that thinks we should push something before it's ready to go. So the thing about corn is we've got that figured out. We became more efficient. We know how to do it. We've got the infrastructure. That's what I think where the thing is hot to move this thing.
A couple questions coming in here. One says our local elevator is going to give us a carbon credit score on our corn and set a price according to the score. Do you agree with that, Doug?
How are they going to do that?
Yeah, that's my biggest question.
There's no guidance out there on how to do it.
And I would say that when we started down this path, we were being pushed to identify what that value should be and how should agribusiness pay for it. The reality is we haven't figured out truly biologically how much is being sequestered. And you can't just, it's not a one size fits all. Western North Dakota is different than central North Dakota to eastern North Dakota to western Minnesota to Iowa. You have different soils, you have different growing conditions, different season. That's all going to be a factor in how much you're sequestering, plus practices in the system you have in place, and if you're putting cover crops in there. And the problem is the people that seem to want to step up and research it are people that the ag community doesn't necessarily trust, because their motive is driven by some research dollars or a white paper they want to write that's coming from being influenced by DC. And that isn't what we want. We don't want to say we believe this is the outcome, but we want somebody that is going to truly come out here, do all the work, start to tell us what value really exists there. Pay us according to the value then. But I'd rather see the private market play in that role and government play in designing the framework to say, guys, here's the boundaries, here's the rails, operate within here, be fair about it. We should be monitoring and providing oversight, not getting involved in that market.
So I've met with a number of companies that are working on this. I met with one last week that actually have a pretty good model put together. Part of the problem is the government has not set down the parameters.
Yep.
You know, that's a bottom line problem. And I've been pushing those guys to do this, you know, and they just, for whatever reason, are dragging their feet. I don't think they know exactly what to do, you know, and we don't really know what the heck we're doing here, you know. That's the problem, bottom line. And you know, I have no problem moving into this area, but don't stake the whole thing on something we don't really understand. So I think the private companies will come with something, and what they're trying to do is sell this stuff into the marketplace and create trading on it and so forth. I'm skeptical about that. I think it's better off if you can have the crops identified, and as it was said, you've got the carbon score, and the public pays more for that, or the system pays more. I'd rather do that than having the government set up credits and so forth. But, you know, you got to walk before you can run.
Levi, Crystal, and Brenda, if you wouldn't mind just going around and collecting any questions that are written out already, that'd be great. We'll have a few more minutes for questions. I'm getting a bunch by text, but I want to make sure anybody that's written one down has them, and I'll come out there to take a couple questions in a moment. Doug mentioned carbon neutral or carbon negative oil. Is that currently possible on the horizon?
Yes. In fact, Dunbarry has a pipeline that comes into southwestern North Dakota from Wyoming, and they're actually doing enhanced oil recovery. And it is, as I understand, it's a carbon negative barrel of oil. So is it possible? I think it's very possible. Even if it's carbon neutral, what a big deal.
Here's another one. I'll give this one to you, Colin. Do you think some transparency on the part of the pipeline, like how much is the project in dollars and how much they can afford to pay for the easement, would have been a better acceptance of the project, would have meant a better acceptance?
Well, about anything would have been better than what they did. You know, they, and I've told Bruce Rastetter this to his face, you know, they screwed this thing up when they started. And he admits that. You know, so now he's out there trying to help, you know, undo this. So, you know, it could have been done, you know, we wouldn't be in this controversy. It would have been done, they wouldn't have hired these oil guys from Louisiana.
Texas, I think, yeah.
Yeah, thought they could push these farmers around and whatever, you know, it caused a lot of problems.
Yeah.
But, you know, we have pipelines all over the place, you know, and once they're in the ground, nobody even knows they're there.
My personal favorite was the argument that continues with some in Bismarck about the reroute there. Most of the local developers have now withdrawn their opposition, but they were worried about a pipeline that was 5 miles north of Bismarck, and it's now been rerouted 10 miles north, and meanwhile there's refined products underneath all of them, coming from refineries and everything else, that obviously, if you're concerned legitimately about the safety of a pipeline, you'd be concerned about those long before you'd be concerned about CO2.
I've been trying to get these guys to reroute it up to Thief River to go across my farm. I can get some of this money. Because they're paying a lot of money for this pipeline, and once it's in the ground, you don't even know it's there. You know, you up and go to Line 3 at Plummer, where it came across, you can't even tell they went through there, and they went through there last year. You know, so...
despite fierce opposition
yeah, right. I mean,
enviros.
So this is all being generated by these same folks that are stirring up all this trouble, and it's, you know, it's coming from the same place. They're even paying to cut the tile lines if they have to do that. They're paying to restore it, right, Levi? Yep. So, you know, so they've addressed all these issues, you know, and, you know, you can truck this stuff. You can send it on rail cars, but it's going to cost a lot more to do that.
All right, I'm going to go out here. We have a few more minutes for questions. Here's one right now. Scott, ask the banker how farms will cash flow when corn is less than $4. You should have a program with the bankers. You've used that number, Colin, of you know, difference between $2 and $4 corn. I mean, can you put into words what that would mean for the agriculture community? We'd have the 80s all over again, wouldn't we?
Absolutely, and that's what got us out of, two things got us out of the crisis. One was CRP. We took 45 million acres out of production in the 80s, and that's what got us out immediately, but what stabilized the marketplace was ethanol. You know, that we have, since you got substantial ethanol in the marketplace, you have not had a problem in the marketplace since then because of that 40% having a market to go into. You know, you got people out there, you know, emailing me this morning about hemp. You know, hemp is going to solve everybody's problems. If you just plant hemp, you're going to be rich and whatever. I mean, you got all these snake oil salesmen running around out there selling this stuff. You know, the truth is we have something here that works. We understand it. We know how to do it. And it, you know, we ought to be pushing it.
Question from the audience. Go ahead.
Hi, Marcy Swenningson, State Executive Director for Farm Service Agency. I just want to make a clarification. We are not forcing producers to do cover crops. That's not something that we do. There are all kinds of climate smart practices that we have available that farmers can look at and consider, but
No, I understand that. Yet. But there are people out there that want to force people to do this. You know, whether you like it or not, there are. So far, it's voluntary. And I would say not practical because nobody is going to do cover crops for $5 an acre. I don't think they'll do them for $50 an acre. I think it's going to be $100 an acre before you get people interested. In my own view, we'll see what happens.
Doug, you want to add anything to that?
I would just say I think Colin's right. Those people that are doing it now are doing it for different reasons. It fits into their rotation. The other thing is it does benefit soil health. You build more organic matter with it. It just has trouble fitting into everybody's farming practices and situation. I would say, too, to piggyback on what Colin said, when you talk about a rising tide raises all boats, if you have a commodity that has good support, good value in the market, it kind of keeps prices up on everything else.
All right, another question from the audience. I sold my 12-bottom plow 13 years ago because we hadn't used it for the previous 8 years. We've changed to good stewardship for the past 21 years, but now we're eligible to qualify for carbon credits to our farm. That's frustrating.
Yeah, it has been frustrating. We've seen that before when we saw the first the watershed practice that came out, the Conservation Security Program. I actually was in it. And if you were already doing conservation tillage, you didn't get any credit for it. It's almost like de-incentivizing or punishing producers for doing the right thing. If they're already doing it, find a way to support their efforts and you'll actually encourage more.
You know, that's how hard it is to do anything in farm policy because we've gone through these cycles where they come up with an idea that's a good idea and then they treat people, you know, ones that did it early got screwed, you know, and it made people gun shy,
Yep.
you know, to get involved in this stuff. So, you know, I agree with Doug. Cover crops are a good thing. I saw what I did on my farm when I, by accident, planted a cover crop.
Yeah.
And it, you know, the next year, I got the damnedest corn crop you ever saw on that piece of ground because I had that cover crop. I didn't even fertilize it. So, you know, it works, but you've got to figure out how to make it work in the system.
Yep.
You know, and, you know, the University of Minnesota are creating these new crops where they're going to try to plant them in the fall, and they're going to get ripe in the spring, and then they go and harvest them over and above the other crop, you know, before that crop comes up. And, you know, it all sounds great, but I don't know. It's a lot of coordination to make it work.
Moisture is an issue. In some places, it's even more dire. You may not even have, I tried doing double crop soybeans one year because I actually had a barley cropped off that in like July 10th or 12th. So I went and planted soybeans in there. It would have worked if I could have got rain in August.
Any final thoughts before we move on? You want to leave folks with here today, Colin?
Well, you know, I just think it's an opportunity for production agriculture going forward. And if we don't see this opportunity and seize it, you know, we're going to lose it. I'm afraid. And we could end up with a serious problem. I'm worried about where these prices are going. This morning, Brazil, their crop is 20% higher than it was last year. They got all this grain in storage in Brazil, just waiting to eat our lunch. And again, you just think about it. So they were growing corn behind soybeans. There was 70 bushel corn, or 70 bushel soybeans, 150 bushel corn. So you think about how are you going to compete against that? And they're not even really using any fertilizer because they got so much topsoil. So I mean, how are you going to compete with those guys long term? And they got all kinds of land that's available to open up, and they are starting to open it up. And this is not the stuff in the, in the jungle. This is land that's been broken up before. It's in pasture, and that's where all of this stuff has come from. Where the Madris and those guys went and figured out how to do this. And I asked Mario Madri, who I've been to see 3 or 4 times. He and his brother have 12 million acres. And I said to him, where did you learn how to do this? He says, the University of Illinois. He went down there and went to school, and they taught him how to do it, and he is a multi-billionaire, him and his cousins and his brother. He was the governor of Mato Grosso last time I was down there, and he could not get the government to build him a road to get out to the river, so he built it himself. He built a 200-mile road himself, a private road just for him to get his crop over to the river. Now if they ever get that stuff figured out, watch out. So I just think there's an opportunity. We should not let it go by. We should seize it.
Doug, any final thoughts?
I see a lot of value. I see a lot of value for North Dakota. I'm not here to promote the pipeline, but I understand there's value there. But when it comes to carbon sequestration, capture, everything that we started 15 years ago, this is what we need to sustain ourselves here in North Dakota, the upper Midwest, and to really shore up energy independence for this country. We all benefit. There's value from it. Agriculture has now found a place in this also. And unfortunately, there are those out there that want to take that value and benefit away. I remember, just backing up a little bit, when we started canola production and they started looking at biodiesel, I remember Europe came out mad as heck and said, you know what? Our rapeseed production, which is the same, has a lower carbon intensity score than your canola does, and they would not allow our canola. They actually put a higher score on it, so it didn't comply under their standards, and they blocked us out of the market. And we just continue to see as agriculture becomes the answer for everything they want to keep raising and throwing at us, and we keep coming up with the solutions, someone wants to keep pulling the rug out from underneath us. We can be that for especially this reason on sustainable aviation fuel. You create critical mass, we'll create the market.
Join me in thanking these 2 wonderful resources. Great gentlemen joining us. John and Stacy, you can come on up. You're done. It's time for lunch for you guys. What a deal, right? Yeah. So go grab some lunch, and we'll get Stacy and John up here. And this next panel, we're going to focus more on the energy side a little bit. John Harju from EERC right here is led a lot of the research efforts, the technical stuff to say how can we do this, how can we use our geology, and also tell us a little bit about enhanced oil recovery. And Stacy Dahl is from Minnesota Power, and Minnesota Power is part of a project called Project Tundra. She's going to walk us through that a little bit today so we understand. One more time, if you have questions for any of the panelists, text me at 701-367-2054, 701-367-2054, or you can write them down on those 3x5 cards and just give them to Crystal. Maybe raise your hand, Crystal. There she is. Brenda's back there from Corn Growers. Levi Andrews helping. So just get the questions on the cards to them, and they'll help us. So next panel, and by the way, we have an ag panel after the energy panel. So looking forward to another great panel here. John Harju is from the Energy and Environmental Research Center at the University of North Dakota. For folks not familiar with EERC, tell us a little bit about what you do day in and day out with so many good folks there.
Sure, thanks, Scott, and good to be with you all this morning. EERC is a contract research arm of the University of North Dakota. Prior to 1983, we were actually a unit of the federal government. Originally, established in the early 1950s under the U.S. Bureau of Mines, became part of the Energy Department on its creation in 1977, and as I said, since 1983, been part of the University of North Dakota. We're about 300 people, annual internal spending of about $50 million, focused on really the critical junctures of energy and environment. Geologists, engineers, chemists, physicists, so on and so forth.
Right here in the great state of North Dakota, doing research, obviously, that's impacting all of us, but also producers on the oil and energy side, oil and coal, and as well as on the ag side as well, which is kind of neat. Stacy Dahl from Minn Kota Power, tell us, I bet you have some member owners right here in the room, probably from Minn Kota Power, whether directly or indirectly, right? Tell us a little bit about Minn Kota Power.
Yes. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I've been with Minn Kota Power for about 12 years, and it's been an absolute honor. And so, as Scott referenced, we're a co-op, and we're a generation and transmission co-op. So we're owned by our distribution members, who are owned by probably many of you in the room here. So as we kind of work through and review one of our carbon capture projects today, this will have a direct relationship to many of you in the room. But Minn Kota has been in existence for over 80 years. So we're a longstanding company with deep roots in North Dakota and Minnesota. And as such, we're actually fairly small in the world of utilities, and we have a little over 130,000 members at the end of the line. So as we plot our resource future going forward, we have to be very careful about how we do that, because those costs can only be spread over a relatively small number of members at the end of the line. So we're very, very conscious of how we manage risk for our member owners, and of costs, and of course, reliability. And that, of course, has a deep and meaningful impact back to agriculture.
Let's talk a little bit about Project Tundra. And I know you have some slides, so folks can get your seat adjusted so you can see the screens. Stacy's going to walk us through a little bit about just exactly what Project Tundra is.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a little bit of background as they're calling up this presentation. I've been at Minn Kota for 12 years, and about 9 years ago, my second son was born, and so I know exactly how long we've been working on this project, because I was on maternity leave, and we had our first meeting on Project Tundra. So I remember packing him up in a Minn Kota minivan and heading out to western North Dakota, where I'm from originally, and leaving him with my folks and attending my first meeting. So we've been working on this project for about 9 years, and we've made a lot of progress. So I just wanted to point out our service territory is in gray there. So of course, many of you in the room can see where you live and where we serve our members, who ultimately serve members at the end of the line. And of course, agriculture is the heart and soul of our cooperative family. So we're headquartered in Grand Forks. Again, 160,000 member consumer accounts when you add in some of the municipal accounts that we serve as well. We have just about 400 employees, and we are very rural. So we, for those 160,000 member accounts, we have 3,500 miles of transmission and hundreds of substations. So a lot of infrastructure that we manage on behalf of you. So with respect to Tundra, I just wanted to give you a snapshot of what this is. So even though this plant is not located really anywhere near here, it's in the heart of central North Dakota, it has a direct relationship back to eastern North Dakota and the Red River Valley. So we have the Milton R. Young Station, which is roughly a 700 megawatt coal station just 45 miles northwest of Mandan. And we have a bold initiative that, again, we've been working on for 9 years to capture 4 million metric tons of CO2 off of that facility. So that is, to give you a sense of context, that is twice the size of any existing capture facility on a power plant today. So this is a substantial leap in technology. We're really fortunate because we have ideal geology right there on the Young Station. And so I always tell folks we have a permitted storage facility that I'll show you in just a moment, but we're so confident in the safety of sequestration that this is going to be sequestered right underneath our plant. That's how confident we are in the technology that John's group and the scientists at EERC have helped us navigate. So what does this do for us? Why would we consider this project, particularly for a utility our size? Because as we manage risk on your behalf, keeping coal in the mix is extremely important to keeping reliability and affordability within our rate structure. And if you read the news, you know how under fire coal in particular is. We have half a dozen EPA rules that are squarely targeted at coal today that we have to manage on your behalf. And this project helps us with a number of those. So we are trying to preserve a reliable, dispatchable, meaning you can call on it. It's different than a wind resource, which operates sometimes and sometimes not. And we have a fair amount of wind on our system, but we have to have those assets that we can call on. And this is a way to preserve both that reliability, that affordable asset that we have, and reduce our CO2 emissions, which are a top target, not only EPA, state of Minnesota, and at times from the financial industry. So a lot of different pressure points that we're trying to manage with this project. So North Dakota has ideal geology, and John can talk and speak expertly to this, but we have 252 billion tons of CO2 storage capacity today. So over the course of our project at 4 million tons, over at least 12 to 20 years, there's ample room for our project. The state leadership in North Dakota has been nothing short of extraordinary, and this goes back decades. So under Governor Hoeven, in concert with EERC and policymakers, we now have a legal and regulatory framework that gives structure to how these projects work. And then, per the previous panel, there's a lot of discussion about how landowners are treated. And that's really important to us too, especially as a co-op, especially as a member-owned utility. Landowner relationships are extremely important to us. So within our storage facility, 97% of landowners have voluntary leases, and that is really extraordinary. We're very proud of that. So we're today in the final development stages. We're working towards that kind of final detailed engineering that will give us that final determinative price. We have not made a final investment decision on this. This is expensive. It is supported by, as you can see, 45Q federal tax credits, which is what it requires. Again, we're 160,000 members at the end of the line. We cannot afford to do this on our own. There isn't a price on carbon today in the market that would otherwise support this. So there is reliance on tax credits. The state of North Dakota has really stepped up for low interest loans, so $250 million in low interest loans. $350 million was just awarded by the U.S. Department of Energy in December. And then we added, midway through last year, TC Energy as a potential investor, so another major multinational company that has an interest in this project and sees the benefit of this project. So we anticipate making a final decision either this year or next. There is still a lot of details to work through and a lot of things that have to come together. So it's a very complex project. It maybe sounds simple from a high level, but it's not. And we have a lot of really smart folks working on this, turning over every rock to see if we can make this project work. But we've made extraordinary progress. We are by far the most advanced project in development across the country. So we have a lot of synergy and alignment to make this project go, along with great local, state, and federal support that really weigh in favor. And most importantly to us, we have great member support. So we have really enjoyed a lot of support from our member owners and those at the end of the line who have weighed in support of this project. So still to be determined in terms of the final investment decision, but there's a lot of great work that's gone into this project.
John, what's the significance of what Stacy's just laid out in Project Tundra in general? How is this a game changer for, in their case, a power generation coal-fired plant? What will this mean?
I think back to when I got involved in carbon management, so it's 22 years ago. If you recall, there was an international framework in the late 90s that had been put forward known as Kyoto Protocol. And U.S. had signed on at that time, although none of the ratifications that would have been necessary for enactment were followed on. But then President Bush put forward a policy measure to actually stand up CCS, or carbon sequestration. And it was seen as a technically viable means of managing carbon as opposed to just shutting down facilities and not combusting fuels and so on. So as I kind of started looking at it at that time, again, Bush administration had put out a solicitation, and I started looking at what I thought this meant to the state of North Dakota as a state that's a big energy producer and a big ag producer. Those are really two of the most carbon intensive industries on the planet. So if you look at the amount of GDP that's generated in various forms of primary economic sectors, those are two of the most carbon intensive industries. So I thought, well, if we don't figure out how to deal with this is going to challenge us and our economy and our way of life on the marketplace. And as you look at it, everything from here goes out. We're not big consumers; we're exporters. Whether it's ag products, whether it's oil, whether it's electricity, natural gas, whatever it is, we need pipelines, we need roads, we need rails. We're moving things elsewhere. And then I started looking at our geology, and it's like, wow, this is exactly what they're looking for. So in essence, looking for good geologic storage options for carbon dioxide is akin to looking for good oil and gas reservoirs. You're looking for high porosity, high permeability with good seals that keep the desired fluid in place. So, so we got busy working on it, and initially it was slow, but over the course of the last 22 years, about 250 companies have joined with us in a program we call the P-Core Partnership. And Coda's been one of those great members over really all of that time, and Project Tundra is something that we've worked closely together on for a very, very long time. Commissioner Goring mentioned, Class 6 primacy, so it's a particular well class that was developed or codified by the EPA in 2010. We actually had comprehensive geologic storage rules in North Dakota before there was that well class. We've been busy long time on it. I'm extremely confident in our ability to do this safely and in an economically viable way. We really have some of the best geology on the planet, and our energy industry is really second to none. I will add, all the way up until about 3 years ago, I was absolutely convinced we would build all this infrastructure for enhanced oil recovery. And actually then, some of the incentives were put in place that that I think favorably incentivize geologic storage more so than enhanced recovery. But I mean, the real opportunity for this state, enhanced oil recovery, it might still be a little bit off in terms of our big stationary sources in the state, but you know, there was mention earlier about the EOR operations in Bowman County here in the state, and that's been operating for a few years now, and just over the border into Saskatchewan, been operating since 2000 really, really well with North Dakota sourced CO2. So,
Talk about sequestration a minute. From the standpoint of some people say, oh, now we're the dumping ground for the world's carbon. You know, why would North Dakota want to partake in that? And obviously safety questions come up as well. As you say, there are examples of sequestration operations already operating in North Dakota. The ethanol plants have gone out there, had good landowner relations on all of it, but the crowd that believes, like a lot of us do, in North Dakota, that you know, the science for the climate hoax, for lack of a better term, is not there yet. But this really presents an opportunity. What role does sequestration play? Just touch on the scientific side of this and what we're doing.
sure. Well,
Are we a dumping ground?
no, absolutely not. I mean, any of the projects that have been stood up to date have a value-added component to it. There are structured payments to the lessors, you know, the landowners that are allowing not only wells to be drilled and operated on their property, but also adjoining property. A single well in the geology that we have can actually take about 1 million tons a year, give or take, and you know, the first facility installed in the state out near Richardson is 125,000 tons a year, something like that. So single well handling all of that. Injection is at that location about 5,000 feet below land surface, or you know, full mile below ground with thousands of feet of impermeable shale above the injection zone. So, you know, again, very well regulated by our industrial commission, and, you know, with decades of science behind it.
Would we be doing this without the EPA primacy that we have that was granted back in the Trump administration?
No, I don't believe we would be doing this without primacy. Our state has actually issued more permits than the rest of the country combined, just because of the slowness of our federal government in terms of processing the paper.
Stacey, talk a little bit about the sequestration effort, you know, the right of way, the conversations that go on with landowners and the folks that own the rights to these geological jackpots that John just described. How has that conversation been?
Yeah, good. So you have to start early, and we participated with EERC in a program called Carbon Safe, where they were evaluating these targets for sequestration. And as part of that, there were stakeholder engagement sessions. So they would have these open sessions with the community where the community could come in and ask questions about this. And if you go to visit our Project Tundra site, we have a video featuring 2 landowners and a local businessman who talk about the engagement process. So we didn't want to just come in as a company and just tell everybody it would be safe. We, of course, brought the experts and the scientists to talk about how this works, why these are good storage targets, why it's safe, because there are impermeable rocks both above and below these targets that don't allow that CO2 to move out of that formation. And there were a lot of questions, and there was uncertainty. But there was the local businessman who sells oil to not only Minn Kota, but the adjacent mine, said it best. He said, I had a lot of questions, but they did a good job answering from a technical perspective. My biggest fear is if we do nothing. And what does it mean to this facility if we do nothing? And so we can try to operate this facility status quo, and maybe we'll make it through the barrage of regulations. It's possible. We're always fighting back against those overreaches of regulation. But at the end of the day, if they're successful on any one of them, it could jeopardize that facility. So we have to constantly be looking at innovating. And so to hear that from the local community, I think tells me we did a good job of engaging and that they recognize that.
Lynn Helms, the Department of Mineral Resources Director in North Dakota, has been saying recently that oil and gas production in North Dakota will enter terminal decline without enhanced oil recovery. Literally just drop off a cliff, which of course has enormous impacts to North Dakota education, to roads, bridges, to literally the tax coffers. So let's shift and talk a little bit about enhanced oil recovery, which right now is not ready for prime time. Is that fair to say? Are we in the early stages of EOR versus sequestration? We're a little ahead of the game. That be fair, John?
Well, I think you have two very different populations of hydrocarbon production in the state. And one is already undergoing tertiary recovery, and that's our legacy or our conventional assets. So I would say that those reservoirs are largely ready today. Ironically, we're short CO2 to do so. So our Bakken asset has been something that we've been working on already for about 12 years with most of the premier producers in the Williston Basin here. The curious thing about our Bakken asset is we're not going to be entering what would be a normal secondary recovery phase. So most conventional reservoirs, you produce them in a primary fashion where the natural energy of the reservoir allows the oil to move into your production well. And you follow that up with massive water injection, and essentially the water sweeps oil toward, from points of injection to points of extraction. The rocks are curious in this Bakken system, so when you start to inject water, you actually push that water deeper into the pore throats because the rocks are something we call oil wet. Most conventional reservoirs, the oil came to the reservoir later, and so the oil's residing on a film of water. So you push water through it, sweeps oil toward the wells. In this Bakken system, we're very, very confident that water injection is not going to be helpful. And that's why we're looking at CO2 much more quickly on the heels of primary production, in fact. So no secondary phase. What we would have typically called tertiary is secondary in this case. And then just because of the sheer volumes of oil that we need to recover, you need a lot of CO2. So today, from our big stationary sources that are proximal to oil country in the state, we produce about 30 million tons annually of CO2 that's going up the stack. Our estimates are, 8-10 times that are going to be necessary to maintain the kind of production we've enjoyed in our Bakken system. So generally speaking, in all of the EOR reservoirs operated to date, most of them in West Texas, but some in Wyoming, some here in North Dakota now, and then up in Saskatchewan. About 2 barrels of oil per ton of CO2 has been a rough ratio. Again, we make somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 million barrels of oil a year in this country. So doing the math says, okay, well, we're going to need about 250 million tons a year, 30, what we produce today.
You're basically saying an insatiable appetite for the carbon.
Insatiable appetite.
Yeah, you're going to use every bit you get here in North Dakota.
Absolutely.
And prevent terminal decline of the oil and gas industry.
Absolutely. So, all of our best work today suggests that we're going to leave 90% of that oil behind in that Bakken system if we don't use CO2, which is, what a waste of an outstanding global quality asset.
Talk a little bit about the value, Stacey, if you would, of the 45Q tax credit to make this happen, the cost involved in this. A lot of people that are critics of this say, all this means is, the fat cats are going to get rich and it's not going to trickle down to anybody else. Well, given what the energy industry is undertaking, I know where the price of electricity is going to go if the status quo remains. And the same could be said for, obviously, the oil and gas industry just under this burdensome regulation. But the tax credits right now are better for sequestration than they are for enhanced oil recovery. And that's largely because this administration doesn't exactly like oil and gas industry, right? So they're going to keep that incentive less. But how essential are those tax credits to these projects coming off the mat?
Yes, you would not see these projects move forward without it. And to dispel the notion, particularly on a coal plant, that anybody is going to get rich off of this project. I know $85 a ton seems like a lot times 4 million. That is a lot of money, but please understand that the infrastructure and operational expenses are really high on these types of projects. So if we ultimately move forward on this project, I promise you no one is making off like a bandit on these projects because they are so energy intensive. So this is exactly the type of incentive that you need to kickstart this industry. And I would analogize these to the production tax credits or investment tax credits that renewables have had for roughly 30 years. So there's a lot of similarities. Renewables get paid on a production basis. So when they turn out a megawatt hour, they claim a tax credit. Similarly with CO2, you capture a ton and you receive this credit. So now we finally have a tax credit that you can apply to a fossil asset to help not only lower its carbon intensity, but also put it on par with renewable incentives as well.
And if you had the carbon today, some magic wand, it was rolling in here, technology-wise, you're not able to use it right now, right? The runway for getting EOR for widespread commercial use is longer than the sequestration thing, am I right?
No, I wouldn't say that. In fact, we've, at this point, done half a dozen field experiments.
So this is ready for prime time.
It's ready for prime time. It needs a lot of investment. And right now, that investment competes against infill drilling. So, certainly there's a better return, to primary production. But if you look at the life cycle of a Bakken well, you decline on your production about 80% in the first year. And, as
Continues to
Dr.
decline.
Helms has mentioned, you have a precipitous decline from there. It flattens out, but it's still declining. In fact, we've already plugged and abandoned, a pretty good population of Bakken wells. And, once they're plugged and abandoned, you're not getting those back for these enhanced recovery projects. So I really disagree that it's not ready for prime time. I think now is the time, but our incentives are really stacking the deck against enhanced recovery. So there's about a $25 a ton difference. There's exactly a $25 a ton difference between geologic storage credit and CO2 that's stored in an enhanced recovery project.
Any questions out there? Raise your hands if you do. I'll head your way. You got some on the cards too. Okay, I'll come out. While I'm making my way there, what did I do with my microphone? Here's a question that either of you can take. How can farmers fight the proven corruption of overreaching government once farmers have an individual issued social credit carbon score that can be used to police production and price, like China already does?
Yeah.
Basically what I would translate this to say, they're going to change the rules of the game down the road.
Rules are constantly changing.
Yeah. And this is
I don't really know how to answer that.
This is one of the challenges we face as a capital-intensive, multi-decade investment of infrastructure is when the rules change, you can't get that investment back. And so that's where, for an industry that loves certainty, we don't have certainty because the rules are always changing. And that's why, kind of back to the technology of this project, when you can scrub as much CO2 as this project is proposing to do, that can help you bridge these kind of back and forth swings of regulation. Because remember, back to the Clean Power Plan, if you remember in 2015, the Obama administration was targeting, depending on how you calculate it, 45+% reduction of CO2 emissions in North Dakota starting in the early 2020s. So we would have already shut down half of the production of our fleet had that rule been allowed to stand. Now, obviously, it was issued a stay by the Supreme Court. Ultimately, we got a new administration, and then we got a new set of carbon rules, right? Then we had another election, and now we have the Biden administration greenhouse gas rule, which is a different standard. So we are constantly trying to navigate this world of changing regulations, which is why technology has to be a good part of the answer.
Here's a question for John. When the coal is injected 1 to 2 miles underground, what state does it end up in? Does it sit there as a gas, or does it combine chemically with other minerals?
So I'm guessing when you said coal, you mean CO2.
Yeah, sorry, when the CO2 is injected, yep.
Yeah, so CO2, when you, after you've captured it and prior to injecting it, you're compressing it to a more liquid-like substance. So it's injected as a fluid, and as long as you're more than about 2,500 feet below land surface, there's enough hydrostatic pressure that it'll exist as a fluid. It still has properties similar to a gas, and for the most part, it actually exists as that fluid occupying pore space.
Thank you.
We have monitor wells that we use to observe it in the subsurface, and we use seismic surveys to evaluate where that CO2 is in the subsurface as well. So we build, prior to ever permitting the facility, we build detailed geologic models and reservoir models that allow us to predict where that CO2 will go. It does not tend to move at an incredibly fast rate, but it does move out from the point of injection and slowly begins to react with formation fluids. So formation fluids by law need to be greater than 1% salt. So these are salty subsurface areas that would never be used for drinking water. And you start to see some slow reaction. This is over the course of tens of years with that fluid, and slowly mineralizes and becomes carbonate minerals, so much like limestone over time.
Another question, if we use all known technology, how long will oil production remain viable in North Dakota?
If we use all known technology?
Yes.
Well, I would say again that CO2 EOR is known technology. It's been used in the U.S. for a little over 50 years now. Again, not in these comparable reservoirs yet. But in visiting with Dr. Helms about this over time, we believe that with CO2 that this becomes more like a 50-year play as opposed to a 20 to 30-year play, which I think is the path that we're on if we don't use CO2. So we'd about double again the volumes and the time. And we know what this has done for our state's economy in terms of financially supporting the state.
Another one, should the state of North Dakota capitalize on the CO2 coming into the state? Want to take that, Stacy?
Yeah, sure. That's one of the tricky questions that I think this emergent economy has wrestled with. So how do you tax it? Because we have received tremendous support, again, from state policy, there really isn't room to further add a tax onto our CO2, and how we sequester it. Our margins and economics wouldn't support that on different projects because the economics are different. Maybe there is some bandwidth, but how you delineate between different CO2 from different types of sources and whether it's in-state or out-of-state starts to get very complicated. So I know that we've had conversations with policymakers about how you might approach this, but you very quickly find a level of complexity that's hard to navigate.
Another question, I'm going to only take 2 more. And by the way, if you didn't get your question answered, remember they will be on our website, agenergyfriends.com. So don't leave here without giving the 3x5 card to somebody, because we'll get all of the answers. We're just not going to get to all of them on the panel. With the proposed pipeline, will there be terminals on the North Dakota end to truck CO2 to oil wells, John?
I don't really know, but my assumption would be, big diameter pipelines like this are assets at the end of the day, and I would certainly assume that over time you would look to extensions on the pipeline. Trucking is not a very efficient way to run an enhanced recovery project. Trucking of CO2 is done all the time in oil fields, but it's for special purposes, not for routine ongoing injection. So all of those projects that I'm aware of around the world are constant injection or nearly constant injection fed by pipelines.
Last one, Stacy, for you. On a dollar per ton of CO2 reduction basis, is the 45Q tax credit a better deal for taxpayers than tax credits for wind, solar, and EVs?
And I think that revolves around the type of resource because, again, comparing it to intermittent sources, fossil assets are a different type of resource. So, for example, we have about over 35% of our portfolio comes from wind energy, which we're proud of. We've led the industry in integration of renewable technology. But again, we recognize the pros and cons of those resources, which is you don't get to control when it's dispatched. So again, the $85 a ton is a lot of money, but recognizing what you're getting on the other side of that, which is an asset you can control off and on, and that has significant value. Again, thinking about where we are within the state of the current grid. So if you read the headlines and pay attention to what's going on in this country, we are retiring those dispatchable assets far faster than they can be replaced, and it's very difficult to replace those dispatchable assets with other fossil-based assets. And so now we're at a near crisis point in the grid with maintaining grid stability. So there is tremendous value, and I'll just give the example of Texas just a couple years ago. So they got upside down on demand versus resources going into the grid. Their grid went to $9,000 a megawatt hour. And so you think about, utility companies that had been in existence for decades, well capitalized, they went bankrupt in 8 days. 8 days. So we are, again, trying to manage this barrage of EPA regulations that are trying to shut down these dispatchable assets with trying to maintain that stability and that affordability. And at $9,000 a megawatt hour, most companies can't survive for very long. So again, in light of those economics, 45Q makes a lot of sense.
Scott, I'll just chime in. I was in front of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee about 20 months ago and had the exact similar question. They were contemplating a enhanced tax credit for EVs. And so right now that's about a $7,500 investment tax credit to the buyer, assuming you meet various criteria. Turns out that's about $150 a ton in terms of avoided CO2. So just to put it into perspective, these credits are considerably lower than what's out there for the EV.
Again, if you have a question for any of these folks, just put it on the 3x5 card, put on there who you'd like to answer. I mean, John is literally internationally known expert, as is the folks at our EERC in these issues. They're a great resource to have right here in North Dakota. Stacy mentioned that they're way ahead of the curve of everybody in the electric generation business as well. So we've got some experts here, and if you have technical questions, a lot of them were technical ones we're not going to get to, put it on there. We'll have it up on our website. Thank you both. Give them a hand, would you, John? How are you? Stacy Dahl. Our final panel is the ag panel, and before you leave today, we're going to give you a little update on the expected long-range forecast for North Dakota's growing season in 2024. We have our meteorologist, Dean Wysocki, who is a fan of the a new cycle, a new way of predicting weather. You have a handout on your table that shows you some charts of what is expected and when for moisture, as an example, for this year. So those charts are pretty valuable. Last thing we're doing today is putting that up and give you a chance to address that. Ag panel, come on up. Ryan Carter from Tharaldson Ethanol going to be with us on the panel. Andrew Mock, who farms near Oaks, North Dakota, and also a expert I'm looking forward to hearing about on the sustainable aviation fuel markets, Ron Zink, joining us as well. In this discussion today, the CO2 technologies are to the future of Tharaldson Ethanol and your industry in general.
I think it's very important to our facility out in Castleton. We need to continue to go down different roads on new technologies, trying to decarbonize our facility. The CCS project alone is worth roughly 30 to 35 points for our plant. If we don't do the CCS, everything else that we're looking at to decarbonize our facility does not work. We've got some projects in the queue that potentially could get us down to sub 15, and eventually with some of these other new technologies that are coming about with post carbon combustion carbon capture and whatnot, we potentially could be close to that zero or sub zero. So you get all these new states that are developing and bringing in the LCFS. We can't compete in a lot of those markets today. You look at, there's a lot of plants out there that currently have technologies within their plant that allowed them to get into Washington, California, Oregon, and now New Mexico. Up into Canada, there's opportunities there, but we get pushed out by other facilities that have a lower carbon score. And quite frankly, I think if we don't have this project happen, the life of Tharaldson Ethanol may not be there in 15 years, because it is getting harder and harder to do business, and you have to come up with new diversity in co-products. We recently just started a protein facility out at the plant just to give us another product into a much higher livestock feed market. That's going well, but we just need to continue to grind. And I look at what Gary has done for, the town of Castleton and the schools. And I think one thing we've got to really pay close attention to is not what is the farmer going to get out of this? What's the ethanol plant going to get out of this? But what's the schools? What these small towns? You look at Castleton's going to have roughly 600 student growth over the next 5 years. And it's people like Tharaldson Ethanol and the soybean plant and whatnot that are coming to town. Grand Farm, Greg's in here somewhere, I know. They're doing great things, and it's kind of becoming a new territory out by Castleton. It's kind of fun to be a part of. So,
great open. Andrew Mock is am I saying it right? Mock. Mock. I knew I was messing that up. Andrew and I have chatted before about this space, but from the standpoint of a corn farmer, and obviously in position of leadership with the Corn Growers Association as well, North Dakota. Talk about what your world looks like without using these CO2 technologies.
Well, I think it's huge, because I like to think of when I was able to graduate from NDSU and come back to the farm, I only had that opportunity because of the ethanol boom at that time. And that was created an opportunity for me to come back to the farm, where I think this sustainable aviation fuel and just the growing demand for ethanol is that next big thing that's going to create that opportunity for my kids to come back. I mean, we always talk about sustainability on the farm and what can we do to make the world a better place than what we got it for. And this is where it's huge for us. I mean, I want my sons and daughters to come back to the same family farm and do it better than what we are doing today. So I think it's such a huge opportunity. I really don't expect or foresee a different opportunity going forward in my farming career that will change it in such a drastic way. So I think it's just huge for the corn farmer.
If you were sitting around the shop and you had a few neighbors around the table, what are the arguments against it?
Well, it's just, I think there's a lot of misinformation out there too that, that's where I think this is such a good opportunity for people to ask questions and get the right information. Why are we doing this carbon? Why is carbon such a buzzword? Why is carbon sequestration? Let's talk about that and whether you're, like the panelists did so good earlier today, that you might not be for it, you might not agree with it, and that's okay. But let's ask questions. Let's get the right information to the right people, from the right people, and let's be part of the solution and look forward in a positive way.
Ron Zink is with us. Ron is with a company called Gevo. Ron, tell us a little bit about Gevo, and then we're going to talk a little bit about sustainable aviation fuels and the opportunity that presents.
I'd love to do that, and I did put up 2 slides just to
Yep.
surprise you. Well, welcome. I'm a farm kid from Carrington, North Dakota, and my cousin and others farm the land I grew up on. I just think this is an amazing opportunity for North Dakota farmers. And a couple of the themes that we heard earlier, if you look at the carbon sequestration programs that you've seen trying to sequester carbon in the soils, those largely have rewarded not the best farmers, but the middle or lower farmers, and not enough money to make them change their practices. We all get that. And also, they wanted multi-year contracts. This new way of thinking rewards the best farmers first, the middle farmers second, and it's a year-to-year thing. So I think it's really, really valuable. Gevo is a sustainable aviation fuel company, but we also have renewable natural gas coming off of 20,000 cows in Iowa. We have a company called Verity that I'm the COO of, and Verity is tracking farm-level data, field-level data, actually, to create CI scores that go into an ethanol plant. And when it comes to sustainable aviation fuel, just to give an example of the magnitude of this, Gevo has forward contracting 350 million gallons of sustainable aviation fuel. We're in the process of looking to build a plant in Lake Preston, South Dakota. That plant would cost over $1 billion, very expensive investment. That would give you 60 million gallons of sustainable aviation fuel. So we think there's just a big opportunity. We're an ETJ company, ethanol to jet company, and there's just a huge opportunity. And I just want to touch on this idea of a CI score. So what you see in this chart is on the very left, you look at Jet A, fossil fuel. The CI of that fossil fuel, give or take, would be about a 90. And then I have an average of 71. I think we talked about 60 earlier for ethanol. But if you took ethanol at a 71 and you use grid energy, just typical energy, to convert that to jet fuel, you would have a 95 CI score. You'd actually be worse than fossil fuels. So that doesn't seem like a very good environmental story. But then you can start to look at the levers you can pull to reduce that down. And those levers are decarbonized energy, wind and solar, reusing thermal energy. But the two that are most important for us in this room is that CCS score, I think it's negative 32, capturing that carbon, and the agricultural benefit score of about negative 30. That agricultural benefit score is really half soil sequestration and half farming practices. Now, we all know that people overapply things like nitrogen. They do that for a variety of reasons. One might be insurance, just to make sure you get the yield that you want. But we can now, through modern farming technologies, use those to reduce, for example, nitrogen usage, lower your CI score, and then run that through an ethanol plant or a sustainable aviation fuel plant, and then give a premium back to the farmer to take a commodity like corn and differentiate it based on its CR and environmental attributes. And I think that's really important and interesting. So that's what we're doing. We're tracking this at the field level. And just one more thing, there was a little bit of talk about, well, how does this all work? It's very confusing. In some ways it is, but in some ways it really isn't. We're using the GREET model from Argonne National Labs. That's been out since 1995. They update that over the years. They update it for different programs like California, but we are tracking how many passes you go across the field, what's your nitrogen use, what's your insecticide, pesticide use, what are you using to dry your grain. We're tracking that field level and using that to score this precisely. And the reason we're doing that is because then the farmers can really benefit from that as opposed to using averages where you're not getting as much benefit. So that's what Verity and Gevo are up to.
So, Ryan, talk about now what that means for ethanol. So I always, to wrap my brain around this, think about the end user, and so some of us say, why are we playing this crazy carbon game? Well, it's dictated to it by our customers, right? I mean, it's the end market that ultimately is making this decision for us. Talk about, how ethanol tapped into that, like in California and other, states that have these regulations that are, over the top, California being a prime example. Compare that to what is possible to go with what Ron's talking about, just from the perspective of ethanol and corn farmers.
Well, I think, the farmer and the plant are definitely going to have to work together on this because it's not, like Ron said, it's easy, but it's not easy. And I think a lot of it is, some of the, the farmers like Andrew and whatnot that have, are very computer savvy or tech savvy. It's a lot easier for them to understand how to track their carbon on the farm or maybe take a little bit more risk than maybe your father would have back in the day or whatever. But for us, we're going to need to get our facility down to 25 or below to get into the 40B SAF market. If we don't, we're not going to have that opportunity to sell into the ethanol to jet fuel. And like Mr. Peterson said earlier, Brazil is definitely. It's going to become an issue. I mean, they're building plants over there like crazy. They're getting away with having dirtier emissions than what we have in our industry, and still being able to come into California and I mean, when we go into California or try to go to California, we might get a premium on our gallon, but it also costs us 10 cents more per gallon to ship it to California. So we're gonna rely on. We just went for our Washington pathway. Oregon adopted California's rules, and hopefully we'll see what comes about with New Mexico. But I think it's going to be the SAF, the farmer, and the ethanol plants working together, coming up and making sure that everybody's covered.
You're nodding quite vigorously, Andrew. Why? Tell us what you want to add to that.
Well, and I think, too, it's got to be an easy process. A lot of farmers are doing a lot of these climate smart practices already. So we need to figure out, and I think that's still to be determined yet too, of how much value is doing no-till or strip tilling or cover crops. That some of that information isn't out correctly. I'll say that what do we gain from that? What do we need to get from that to be able to get into these markets? And the panelists have talked about it too. But I just think it's kind of crazy how LanzaJet facility in Georgia right now creating this sustainable aviation fuel is importing all of their ethanol from Brazil. Like we are good at producing corn. We're good at producing ethanol. Let's just keep it here in the U.S. and do it, how we know. We can track, we can do a lot of things. Another issue is data. A lot of farmers are, we create a lot of data, we have a lot of data, we want to keep that, safe to us, and, we need to provide that in a way that, if we're going to get paid for it, that's our option if it so chooses or not, but it's got to be in a way that it works for everybody. And with the GREET model and things, it actually is not too bad to put your information in and figure out where you are on a farm level, on a field level, to be able to have these guys, take that information and say, yep, this kernel of corn came from this field and it had a CI score of, X number. And, that retraceability is going to be big too going forward.
Ron, talk a little bit about why the ethanol is coming from Brazil right now. Why are we missing out?
I'm not an expert on ethanol from Brazil, to tell the truth. But I think coming back to home, one thing I wanted to say is what we're trying to do from a business model is make a CI score zero cost to the farmer. So we can score your corn, have a CI score for your corn, and then let you see where you want to participate, if you can participate, and if you can get a premium for that corn from somebody like selling it to Tharaldson Ethanol. And once you say, oh, I want to roll in this program, then we do the hard work to audit that back, because you have to have auditability back. And so I think that's a pretty good method. We work with ag retailers or co-ops or agronomists, or sometimes directly with farmers, to get farmers started on this. And to me, given this is fairly new in 2024, but the 45Z turns on January 1st, 2025, is how do you kind of get ahead of it? We've talked to the North Dakota Corn Board and others to say, let's get ahead of this. Let's get some scoring done in some semblance of these farms and to see where you are. But then you have the option as a farmer to say, do I want to haul a still elevator? Do I want to ship it to Castleton? And then the ethanol plant can decide with their CI score what programs they want to roll in. And what's wonderful about this is it really is a season-to-season thing. So you're not committed as a farmer to anything. And one more thought I'll have for you is GEVO has a $30 million USDA grant in Lake Preston area where our SAF plant is proposed to be built, where we are paying farmers today per acre to be involved in that. We take no title to their carbon, no title to their corn. We just help them understand their CI scores and help them participate in these programs. And we've learned a lot from that. We're trying to take that approach to other states, because to get started, we think you'd have to have a very farmer-friendly view towards this. And so that's what we're personally doing.
Interesting, very interesting. Question has come in here on this front, and by the way, others are welcome as well. You can either text me, 701-367-2054, or hand one of these cards, or just wave this card and I'll come around here in a little bit. If growers are already partaking in a carbon exchange, are the benefits they will see from carbon storage solutions, 45Q, additive or in competition? Are you doubling up in credits, I guess is what they're asking, or?
Well, I'm not sure what carbon exchange they're referring to. There are programs by Truterra and Bayer and others where they're paying farmers to sequester carbon. If you've enrolled in one of those, the title of that carbon likely did go to one of those companies. And so if you want to now switch over to something like this, you'd have to consider the interplay there, and there might be some. But the good news is many farmers haven't done that yet. They have flexibility, and those contracts are often cancelable anyway. But it is something to consider. As far as as a farmer, 45Q is probably not terribly important. As long as you own your carbon, then you're good to go, whoever wants to buy it. And we want to set up a marketplace, so if an ethanol plant or a SAF plant or someone else wants to buy corn, they can decide what the premium per bushel will be. And that'll be based on your CI score.
And I'll just add too that a lot of this is evolving. Things that are happening now, likely will change very soon, and so there's no standardization. There's no, it's just evolving. So is it possible for a guy to double dip? Maybe. Those are the things that need to get ironed out between now and then, to have some not regulation, but just accountability, I guess, with it.
In the case, Ryan, of if I'm a grower.
Yep.
And I want to sell you my corn, I don't have to do any of this other stuff, right? I'm right now, by selling to you, I'm in the game.
Right, correct. And as far as double dipping, like from the ethanol standpoint, we cannot double dip. So during the years of 25 through 27, as the 45Z comes to an effect, if we were already sequestering out at the plant and we were taking that 45Q, we would have to suspend that 45Q to take that 45Z. So that has... Some of those guidelines have come, to where nobody can be, capturing the Q or the Z. Now, if we were doing SAF, we could do the 40B and the 40Z. And the 40Z for us is definitely it's a much better, credit for us. But right now, with the way the project is moving forward, hopefully we can be up and running by Q3 of 2026. But we lose 2 years or a year and a half of the 45Z unless they do extend it, like there is some talk in DC for that. So
yeah, if there's a Trump administration, you probably would have also the credit you get for sequestration match that of enhanced oil recovery.
Right.
And then they're really in the game. Ron, just talk a little bit about this. The opportunity that is available to the growers in this room. if we are able to crack the code of sustainable aviation fuel, you'd be hard pressed not to have your hair tingling thinking about the opportunity. But what are we up against from doing it? What is standing in the way right now?
Well, for sustainable aviation fuel, the hardest thing right now for companies like ours is just the investment required. So if you look at the difference between Jet A, which might be $4 a gallon, and sustainable aviation fuel, which is closer to $8, you're like, wow, that's double. How can you manage to do that? Well, the real question is, once you pay for that investment, that 8 goes much closer to 4. So we just have to get through the initial phase of that investment and building these plants. For farmers, we have a phrase at Gevo, it's meet the farmers where they are. So someone said, you're going to come and make me plant cover crops? Like, no, we're not planning to do that. You got to decide how you want to farm, what's best for you. Cover crops are much easier in Iowa than in North Dakota. But meet the farmers where they are and have them participate. And with a gradiating scale that CI goes down, ethanol plant makes more money, they can share profit back to the farmer. It's a really interesting time because like California right now is you meet the standard or you don't. But this is like a graduating scale. Every CI point I reduce, I could add maybe a premium to my bushel above that. And I've never heard of that before, really. So to me, it's just a phenomenal opportunity. We do want the Summit pipeline to come through to help the ethanol plants and SAF plants get to the point where they could participate. And then one more thing, there's a ton of talk here about regulation. I get it. We're all worried about regulation. But part of this is, if you look at the USDA grant, was to get started, to get farmers to participating, and then move it to market forces. Now, whether that happens or not, I don't know. But that's the plan because the consumer demand is there for these lower CI things. And even in Europe, in 2027, they have the CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, where if you're a French company making a car tire, and a Belgian company making a car tire is using less environmental friendly standards and bringing it into France, they're going to make you adjust for that because it's not competitive. So the whole world is moving to this greenhouse gas emission accounting, and to me, it's easier to join them than to be against them.
I'm going to place something on the screen, and then I'm going to walk around and gather any last questions that are here. So if you have one, I'll walk around and come and find it from you, and then we'll finish this panel on the other side of this video and take some more of your questions. This was sort of a give back because a lot of growers took time away from getting ready for the season to join us today. I asked our chief meteorologist, Dean Wysocki, to explain a weather forecasting model that is doing long-range forecasting really, really accurately. And on your tables, you have this year's charts to talk about who's dry, who's wet, when the rain is coming. So take a look at those charts. They're about this coming growing season. But let's pick that up, and then I'll walk around, get the questions. We'll finish the panel on the other side.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dean Wysocki, Chief Meteorologist here for Flag Family Media. I want to thank everybody for inviting me out. Unfortunately, I can't be there in person. I'm down in Arizona golfing, probably shanking it off into the desert somewhere. But what I want to talk to you about today is the LRC model. It's a new model, and it is used in the ag community, energy community, and it has an unbelievable accuracy, forecasting 6 to 12 months out in advance. In fact, it can forecast 6 to 12 months in advance. The forecast would be more accurate than your 10-day forecast on your weather app. So how does something like this work? Well, the LRC is the central piece to the atmospheric puzzle. Obviously, everybody's heard of El Nino, La Nina, and that does affect the LRC, but the LRC is the central piece of the atmospheric puzzle. It goes beyond any limitations of any other traditional forecasts that are out there. There's only 10 meteorologists that use the LRC in the country. Luckily, we're one of them here in the Northern Plains, and this has a great impact on our ag community. We've already had 200 plus people in the ag community that have signed up for the LRC. And I'll tell you what, I wasn't a big believer at first. I've worked with it for over 3 years now, and I'll tell you, it is going to be the next generation of long-term forecasting with tremendous accuracy. How does it work, though? Well, in early October, a new LRC cycle starts, and each year is completely different in terms of cycle length. That's how we can forecast 6 to 8 months to 12 months out, is what is the cycle length each year. Some years it's 30 days, some years it's 45, 50, 55 days. So the cycle length will set up each October, early October, about October 6th. And by the end of November, early December, we know what the cycle length is. Then we can extrapolate that out and forecast all the way through the winter, the spring. It keeps cycling all the way through the summer and into the fall. Just amazing. I mean, it's just the accuracy on this is beyond belief. So the pattern sets up in October and November. By December, we can forecast 6 to 12 months out with 90% accuracy on some of the major weather disasters and major storms that hit the U.S. And this is good for the U.S. It's good globally. This works globally. And this helps in our ag community for planting, growing, and also for the harvesting cycle. Here's a couple of examples from this year's LRC cycle. Big storm wallops the west coast here, December 20th. With the cycle length being 46 days, we knew that this was coming back, and sure enough, it did on February 4th, 46 days later. Closer look at home, Fargo. We had a big storm on January 13th with a mini blizzard and limited visibility, not a lot of snow, about an inch or two. We knew 46 days later this was going to come back. Sure enough, February 27th, another mini blizzard hit the area with limited visibility. So looking out ahead for the spring and summer, this is what the LRC is forecasting. Here's a look at the northern plains all the way down into Texas and into the central plains. So from the valley eastward, we're looking at or above normal precip. This goes all the way south into areas of Nebraska and into areas of Oklahoma and northern Texas. Below average precip is expected for areas of central and western North Dakota. Not great news, that's for sure, but from the eastern third of the state, south and eastward, we're looking at or above average precip. Temperature-wise, area-wide throughout the northern and central plains, we're looking at above normal temperatures. This helps in agriculture for planting, spray season, harvesting. It's been a big help optimizing crop yield, pest and disease as well. If you're doing some spraying, you want to know if it's going to rain. Is it going to be windy? The LRC model can help out on that. Here's a look at what we call the Substack. There's numerous different things you can subscribe in for the LRC. What you're looking at here is this is narrowed down by county. So you can pick your specific county or 3 counties here and be able to tell, hey, when are the peak areas of precip? When are the dry periods? This is called the Substack, or this is called the dashboard. You can get daily ag reports. This has really, again, helped out our ag community. And it's not just the ag and energy community. A company called Elanco, they have saved $120 to $280 million using the LRC. So I hope that helped you out. Again, it's going to be from the valley eastward, a pretty average to above average spring and summer in terms of precip, but boy, the central western part of the Dakotas not looking the best. If you want more information on how to subscribe to the LRC, Scotty has got some handouts for you. Feel free to look that over. Shoot us an email if you have any more questions. Thanks again, everybody, for having me out. Have a great day.
All right, we have a few more questions for the panel. Mike, stand up and tell us what's on your mind.
Scott, question that I have, and comment probably too, is for the panel, is that, and I've been at a lot of marketing meetings this winter, and as you know, as a corn producer, we were selling corn 2 years ago for $6.50, $7. Even got on, sold some corn for $7.78. I mean, I got that on the wall. But you've been hearing all the markets, and I asked this at the meetings too. How come we're not talking about, the carbon intensity score and what's going in the world market? Because it's not just, Brazil moving on carbon. It's also Europe is embracing it. Canada just passed it this last summer, carbon intensity score. A lot of our ethanol in North Dakota, as well as South Dakota, because we have a lot of North Dakota farmers hauling corn down into South Dakota, as well as Minnesota. And so the market is demanding it, and the buyers go out, and they're not only buying corn, they're buying soybeans, they're buying wheat, other products. And we probably lost, from what I'm hearing at the marketing meetings, there's no good news because we're producing, we're good at what we do, and we don't have a market. And aviation fuel is probably all we got to look forward to is into the market, as well as biodiesel with the soybeans and the green bison. But it's not just California, it's all the other countries. And I just wondered if we could have some comments on that, because that's the problem we have for the future, is, as well as Andrew had shared about your kids, and I've got my kids and now my grandkids too. And, I lived through the $2 corn. It doesn't work. And so I'd like to hear some comments on that.
Andrew first, Ryan, Ron, either one of you want to jump in, go ahead.
Sure. Well, there's always been incentives for ethanol plants, but I would say ethanol is in addition to sustainable aviation fuel, a big opportunity because of the 45Z credits coming up in January 1st of 2025. So that's a pretty short time away. So the first thing to differentiate your corn bushel is to score it. So, and then you say, well, who's willing to pay for it? And these incentives, there's voluntary incentives, tax incentives, compliance incentives. The United States isn't compliance driven as much as like Canada, where they're charging $400 a ton if you have too much carbon out there. So if you score your corn, then Ryan and other ethanol plants, and then soon to be sustainable aviation fuel plants, can benefit from that scored corn and then profit share that back to you. So I think it's coming. It's just we're in the midst of a change right now, and the question is, can you decommoditize a commodity, or can you differentiate a commodity? The commodity being a bushel of corn, and the answer is yes, you can. The question is, how do we get there? And it's just all kind of coming online right now. So we're just in the midst of a big change, but I think it's going to be available.
Anything else either one of you want to add to that? Should we go to the next one? A listener says, listener, I sound like I'm on the radio right now. Somebody in the audience asked this question on the card. You will never satisfy the woke environmentalists on the coast. Like a spoiled child, they will continue to demand more. We could clean the air in California in the early 90s with biodiesel, and it wasn't enough then. It won't be this time either.
I couldn't agree more with them.
The woke is not going anywhere, right?
Well, I don't know if woke is here to stay, or probably, but what's it mean for us is my question, right? And there is the East Coast, West Coast, middle divide in the country. That's unfortunate. But what does it mean for you? And how do you participate, or do you just bury your head in the sand and say, it's going to go away? Well, this isn't going away. And it's not just the United States. We know that, right? You look at Canada, you look at Europe. So the ability to look at GHG emissions across supply chains is here. Consumers really are demanding it. And my question for all of you is, are you going to participate or not? And if you are, how do you go do that? And I think companies like ours is giving you a path to do that.
And Ryan, I've never seen it. I never thought I'd see a time when the marriage of the ethanol industry and the oil industry would come together. But this has prompted it, because there's a big giant target on your back and on their back, and certainly modern agriculture as well. But there is a certain element out there that says you're caving, you're giving into, you're going to let them win. What do you say to that?
I mean, I can't say that. EV is the real thing. I mean, I don't think it's going to work. I know there's many people out in the audience today that knows it's not going to work. But again, your West Coast states, California being one of the biggest drivers of it. I think oil and gas and ethanol coming together and trying to do something as a partnership, I think definitely works. Do I also think, though, maybe ethanol could partner up with a hybrid EV and still have the internal combustion engine with a backup EV? I think that'd be a smart move for the ethanol industry as well, just to keep everybody close to us, right? And continue to go down this road. And because, like we said earlier, decarbonization is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. We now just got to figure out, how are we going to work as a country that is more powerful than any country in the world from a natural resource, energy, ag, all that, and not allow, other countries to basically, put their hands down on us and not allow us to grow as a company or an industry.
Next question says, all of today's panelists have spoken about the technological needs to make ag and energy thrive, but many average citizens would not have a mental image around technology as it relates to jobs in those industries. What is the strategy to engage the next generation to invest in these industries and their tech jobs?
I think you're seeing it already. If you look at the big tech, for example, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, they all have sustainability implementations involve a lot of small companies. Our company is getting involved in this. It's a sustainability play. So you're seeing it. You're seeing CPGs, consumer packaged goods companies, starting to want to know, their consumers want to know how this was produced. I think the complication in this sitting here is, you got the far extremes on both sides of the political aisle, and everyone's like pointing to them like this is all broken. And perhaps it is, but it really isn't. It's a 1 + 1 = 3. Oil and gas is here to stay. Ethanol is here to stay. Electrification makes a lot of sense in certain parts. Our company is trying to figure out how to decarbonize a really difficult decarbonize area, which is flying a plane from here to Paris. You can't run that on electricity. So the things we can decarbonize, I think we should. But the things we can't, let's do this. You can do a 50-50 blend, sustainable aviation fuel to Jet A. There's a lot of opportunity for North Dakota farmers if you can get those airlines to adopt that. And there's already adoption in place. So we just need to turn the corner and start making it.
And you talked earlier, Andrew, about your kids and the fact that they're going to have a chance because of these technologies to stay on that farm and have it be financially viable, just like ethanol brought you to the farm. Do you think we're doing a good enough job of having this conversation with the next generation of farmers?
Well, I think that's always evolving, and we need to do more of it. And that's where, to me, meetings like this, where we can come together and show that we can work together, and that's what we need to move forward. Bounce back on your previous question about kind of, to me, ethanol and the oil world working together. We do a lot of advocacy out in D.C. with E15 and mid-level blends and E85, and we need gas just as much as we need ethanol in that world. So how can we work together? And now that we're able to do that a little easier in the last few years, it seems like has been huge for us. I mean, everybody likes to see other people working together for the most part and try to create a common goal. And to me, that's all part of the sustainability and the legacy that I want to leave my kids and they live their kids when they get to that age. So, I mean, I think it's ever evolving.
One of the ways I've come to believe that this is necessary for the future is just listening to people like this. I mean, you have the ag community overwhelmingly supporting this because they know what's against them. You have the oil and gas and the coal world overwhelmingly for it. And these are the people that are filling the tax coffers of the state of North Dakota. And without them, we don't build roads and bridges and water projects and have funding for schools. So I lean in and listen to what they're saying. And the only real argument against it is you're caving to the woke world we live in, which obviously none of us has the power to change, unfortunately, at this moment. Question for you, Ryan. Has there been discussion of a North Dakota pipeline tying eastern plants to western point of sequestration or utilization of CO2? Seems like a good project for our industrial commission.
Repeat that, please.
Has there been discussion in North Dakota of a pipeline that would tie eastern plants to western points of sequestration for utilization of CO2? Seems like a good project.
Well, I mean, I guess the CO2 pipeline is essentially coming from the east to the west, tying in all 57 plants that are signed up with Summit, going out to the west. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, I think maybe what they're getting at is we could do this ourselves. We don't need to take ethanol off of plants in Iowa and South Dakota, just do it ourselves.
I don't remember who talked earlier, if it was on cost. I think it might have been Stacy, right? It's when we first looked at partnering up with Summit, I ran quick back of the napkin numbers just to take a pipeline from Tharaldson Ethanol out to Western North Dakota, and it was $500 million, and that was 4 years ago. I bet you we're probably, take that times 2 today. We're probably would be $1 billion+ just in pipeline. I mean, there's no possible way for an individual plant to do this themselves. I mean, we do need to have, all these different companies going in together to build something like this. And even North Dakota alone, if we took every one of our plants, got to take Red Trail out of it and take Blue Flint out of it, because they're currently doing it today, there's no way we would even get the shovel in the ground.
One more question and we'll let you guys go. Lots of talk with developing country Brazil. How about China, that has a carbon contribution double of the USA, but is actually doing nothing to lower their carbon score? Bad actors are eating our lunch. Agree with that, Ron?
The international side of this is complex. China is probably the largest EV market in the world, so maybe take a look at that. But, you know, back in the day, I worked at Microsoft, I ran government affairs for Europe, and thought a lot about, you know, developed countries have gotten to where we are, and then what do you say to developing countries? And you could say China is a developed country, but it's a complex situation, because it's easy to say, well, we are, but you can't get there because the rules have changed. So I don't know. I think we should encourage, though, through trade policies. And Europe is interesting when they do that CBAM, where you can't do something dirty there and ship it here and expect it to compete against our farmers. So if the Brazil is really a situation, we should be talking to our legislators about it. And same for goods imported from China. There should be a level playing field. And if there's not, we should create one. But that creates compliance and regulation, which a lot of us are concerned about. So you have to a little bit of think through the nuance of that.
Give each of you a chance just for final comments before we wrap today. Ryan, what would you say? What do you want to leave? What do you want these folks to leave with?
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming out. It does truly mean a lot when we see people gathering over this project, over, you know, our like Andrew said, next generations. Again, it's going to take all of us to do this together to continue to build the state of North Dakota. I don't even care outside of ethanol or whatever. I think for us to continue to have a strong state that literally could stand on its own over anybody in the United States, I think that's something to be proud of. And it's people like you and, you know, us that come together and do it as a team. I think that's great. So
great, Andrew.
And I would just concur too that you know, it's to me it's activities like this where you come out, ask questions. Let's get the right information out. We all have questions. Let's try to get the right answers and kind of work together and move forward together as a team. I mean, that's perfect.
Ron?
I think North Dakota has such a bright future. I mean, with the carbon capture, with ethanol plants, with slow CI corn. And I just encourage us to try to navigate this stuff. It's easy to be a victim, like, oh, woe is me. I think we should be a frontiers people and go out and conquer this. I mean, North Dakota has everything it needs to be a leader in this area, oil and gas industry, ethanol, corn. Let's go do it.
This entire presentation will be up at agenergyfriends.com. That's the website, agenergyfriends.com. Also, any questions you either leave behind on your table or you've handed to us, we will get those answered. There's a lot of questions already that have come up from previous forums where there's questions and answers from the experts on these. If you got anyone in particular you want to answer the question, just put that on the 3x5 card. I want to thank Congressman Colin Peterson and Doug Goring. I believe those two had another appointment, so they had to leave, but John Haryu and Stacy Dahl are still here, as well as Ryan Carter and Andrew Malk and Ron Zink. We appreciate these guys very much, so feel free to hang around and ask a few questions if you'd like afterwards. But thank you for coming. We appreciate you very much. Thanks a lot.